Welcome to another Nonsense Wars production. Today I build another scale model, a 1 to 700 Andromeda class from the Space Battleship Yamato franchise. I got this kit as a gift, and I decided to build it because it had already lost its collector value. The box had been opened and some contents had been removed. I also thought that the age of the kit, it came out within a year of 8860, and the form of the prototype would contrast with the Tamiya Fletcher that I built before. Let's do a quick unboxing again. The box has a standard style of lid, but also some internal dividers, which seem more common with Japanese kits. The parts come primarily on 2 large sprues, with 4 special ones for trim pieces, the stand, and a marbled character trinket. The yellowish instructions may have been white in 1979, and a small bag contains some wires and metal bits. More on that later. The mold quality definitely feels worse than that of the Tamiya Fletcher. Some parts have noticeably offset halves, while others have noticeably poor-fitting tabs. Many of the greebles on the hull don't even have tabs. You simply glue them onto a light outline. Even some elements that do have an alignment mechanism still leave huge gaps between features. To be fair, I imagine that other model kits of the same vintage, perhaps even the Lindbergh Fletcher, offered comparable quality or lack thereof. Some seams wouldn't close well no matter how much finagling, but I could sand out many of the lesser imperfections, and I finally bought a cheap set of files just for this purpose. While they cost less than $10, everything is relative. They still work much better than a strip of sandpaper taped to a spudger. Like the Fletcher, most of the Andromeda is the same color, so I decided to build almost everything before painting. Some parts, like the tanks underneath the ship, had to remain separate such that I could paint surfaces that would become inaccessible after assembly, especially with just a rattle can. The same goes for the turrets and the superstructure, though to a lesser extent. As I learned with the Fletcher, I painted everything mounted on barbecue sticks with adhesive putty, originally with the same paint I used on the other model. Weathering turned into a huge issue this time. The rust-colored Vallejo wash that I used on the Fletcher didn't apply that well, but it didn't really show. The darker Army Painter wash that I wanted to use on the Andromeda also didn't apply that well, but it showed. After testing various paint and wash combinations, it felt like I had to match brands for the paint and wash, and I resprayed the entire ship with Vallejo primer in order to use Vallejo wash. Annoyingly, I still couldn't get a consistent coat of wash over the whole ship, despite trying a couple different techniques. I settled on only lining the panels, which still proved challenging due to the poor mold quality and my lack of practice. Sometimes the wash seemed to do nothing without a side-by-side comparison, though I eventually got a result that I liked, and I only had to redo a few parts. Along with more practice, a better way to light my workspace and a better way to hold the model could help as well. Fortuitously, wiping away excess wash left enough residue to give a little bit of a weathering effect, even if not applied uniformly. Aside from the wash, I also hand-painted the engine cowling and the top deck. I masked the edges when I painted the deck, and I masked the deck when I repainted the hull. I used a Tamiya masking tape specifically for modeling, and the edges turned out much sharper than the edges on the Fletcher hull. The yellow trim pieces in the kit have the same problem as chrome pieces in other kits. I can't clean up the part or the sprue connections without having paint of the exact color. I would need to repaint the entire part, though I opted not to do so in order to preserve some of the kit's original flavor. Now let's look at the lights, the special feature of this model. The hull has internal fittings for 2 bulbs in the front and 1 bulb in the back. These illuminate the wave motion cannons and the engine respectively. My kit did not come with the original lights, so I had to dig up a set and some wiring from my parts bin. The base contains a battery box and it transmits power through 2 contacts where the ship meets the stand. By design, this battery box faces upward and you need to unscrew it to access the batteries. I did not like this arrangement and I turned it over with some dowels and hot melt. Other features, the turrets also traverse and the gun barrels also elevate, though this sort of setup really doesn't make any logical sense for a spacecraft. Overall, I think the Andromeda turned out about as well as the Fletcher, despite the poor molding and my unsteady painting. Still, I think it looks pretty good from an arm's length, and you only start to notice imperfections from up close. Finally, the scale is unfortunately 1:700, making it half the scale of the Fletcher and my other 1:350 models. Relatively speaking, the Andromeda should be twice as big, which actually doesn't seem huge for a sci-fi capital ship. It would barely match the volume of the Titanic. Anyway, this wasn't the model that I really wanted to build yet, and on that note, this is the end of the video, so have a nice day.